Now, the way I hold scissors is like this.
Oh,
I don't
wow.
really put my fingers in the groove. I just like I'm just used to holding it like
So
this.
you're a scary scissor
Yeah,
holder.
it's a claw grip. Hello and welcome to Stationery Test Drive, where every week we take humble tools and exotic tools and do interesting things with them. I'm Vishal.
I'm Samir.
This is Minjal, and this week we're exploring, as you all can see, scissors.
Oh, I thought this was just a decoration. I didn't realize. And yeah, we are doing scissors. We are artists and designers and calligraphers. And these are a lot of scissors. So why don't we start with, I don't know, let's just pick one at random. The Scotch one, because we all know the brand Scotch. Well, tell us about this one.
The Scotch Scissor. This is Minjal's recent purchase. And Scotch, of course, for those of you who don't know, is a brand made by 3M. And we've actually spoken about them before because they're the ones who invented Scotch tape and masking tape. So the Scotch brand is one of those very technical, very historical brands that makes a lot of stationery. Scissors in general are much older than the Scotch brand. The Scotch brand is only about 100 years old.
And of the Scotch varieties, I'm guessing this is a very modern scissor, certainly in design and in materials. It's got a rubberized grip on the insides, but hard plastic on the outsides. Is even a torque screw or no? It's just a regular screw. Yeah, the modern scissor. And we have a bunch of other examples. We have classic scissors. We have folding scissors. We have craft scissors. And my favorite, so maybe I'll talk about this, and why don't I just show you this while Samir cuts something up with the other scissors. These are not necessarily known as scissors in most of the world. These are called shears, and these are called kitchen shears. Now, you can split hairs or cut hairs, depending on about what a shear is, a secateur is, or a scissor is. These are great, and they sound weird to show them on a craft and stationery channel, but we use them for craft today. And I love these because they're made for the kitchen. They're made for, like you can see, there's like a bottle opener here, bit here. There's a can and grippy thing here. My favorite things about these scissors are that they break.
Yeah, that is a killer app of that scissor.
We specifically chose this to show off because I think if you're a scissor manufacturer out there like Scotch or even Munix, who Samir is demonstrating right now, this is a great thing for scissors to do. The reason shears have them is because in the kitchen you often, when you're using, and these aren't broken, these just have a little bit that you can put them together in. You have to just remember how, and I seem to be forgetting how, but there you go. That's a perfectly functional pair of shears, kitchen shears now. The reason they break apart and come there is that you get food stuck in here. And what better way to clean them than to open it out? No need for any screwdrivers or implements or whatever. And then they're good to go after a wash. You can dunk them into your dishwasher. And I think all of these would benefit greatly from that, as much as I like these. Minjal, what do you think about the fancy breaking apart thing? Is that actually useful to you? Because I found it very useful.
So I think these would go closest to the the rudimentary scissors that were maybe first used by
let's say something like this, a textbook, right?
No, not really. I mean, I think when scissors were first invented somewhere around 3,000, 4,000 years ago.
Yeah, scissors are a very, very old thing. Yeah,
they're very old. And I think what the Egyptians, I believe,
of course,
used two bronze blades. So they were not really, the pivoted cross blades that we see today.
Yeah.
But they were just bronze blades that were stuck together with like a connecting,
right,
like wire, right? Maybe some metal wire.
I mean, well, the thing about scissors the thing that we consider scissors today are obviously two pieces of metal with handles and attached with some sort of pivot. Now, this design itself is not actually that new. It's around since the first few centuries AD. I think the Romans are supposed to have invented it.
Right.
Well, in the Iron Age, which would be the best time to have scissors, I guess.
But the original design of a scissor, which still exists in some uses, is sometimes called a spring scissor, and people who are into sewing will actually be very, very familiar with it. It's a single piece of metal, 2 blades
With a U bend.
with a bend like that.
Yeah.
And people who do sewing will be very familiar with it because they're usually just called snips. You can get them very commonly, and they're usually used when you're sewing just to cut off thread quickly. So, initially, it was just much easier for people like the Mesopotamians and the Egyptians to make a single piece of metal and bend it with a bit of a springy motion and have that sharpened, and that was the scissor.
You know, Samir, you just reminded me that we are missing out one scissor that I own that I'm going to go and rummage for. So, Minjal, why don't you tell us about these strange ones? And Samir, you tell us about this one because this has both personal and long history.
So
Yeah.
I believe the steel scissors that we use today were invented only around 1761 or thereabouts,
Right.
in England. And that was when scissors were actually mass produced.
Yeah.
Before that, you had a lot of specialist scissors where the handles were, say, engraved or decorated, or so there were a lot of fancy scissors. And the mass-produced variety, obviously, I mean, if you were to guess which country makes more than 70% of the scissors today, would you take a guess?
China. I
China.
assume.
Who else would? So yes, over 70% of the world's scissor production today takes place in China.
I just wanted to mention this one because Samir mentioned snips, and that's what these are called.
Can you cut paper with this?
You can cut
We can try.
industrial grade aluminium sheeting with this, and that is what it was made for. You have to be very careful because, again, spring loaded. These are spring loaded. These are actually
Spring-loaded.
spring loaded. You have to be very careful, and that's the thing with scissors. The term "running with scissors" being a bad thing is there for a reason.
So these are what modern spring-loaded scissors are like, in that they actually have a spring here that pushes them apart, and you need to press them. If you leave them alone, they go back. And this design that I was describing to you before were spring-loaded by design because it was a single piece of metal, and this would kind of spring them apart, so you would press them together to cut. But yes, let's test this out on paper. I think
this is a very overkill.
it's actually really fine.
Yeah, because it's supposed to give you that kind of fine edge literally on aluminium. These are sometimes called airplane snips because I'm guessing in the aviation industry where you have very fine gauge steel and
It's not
aluminium
bad for a
sheeting.
piece of hardware.
Yeah, this is very much hardware compared to stationery.
Let's close this to be
yeah,
safe.
To be safe, you have to be very safe with your instruments. That's why you don't hand people scissors this way, right? Minjal, you've figured.
Yes.
There's
So
some
the Wikipedia page on scissors is full of superstitions about scissors. One of which is obviously not handing a pair of scissors to somebody you want to actually continue being cordial with.
I think that it's a superstition that has grown out of just good safety practice.
Yeah.
Usually if you're pointing a sharp implement at someone, you don't mean them well. Historically, I'm talking before we swapped sharp-ended things for snub-nosed rifled cartridges.
So the thing with scissors obviously is that they're used across industries, right? Right from gardening to medical, grooming industry, art, craft. There is not one industry where you wouldn't really use a different kind of food, a different kind of scissor. And I think what we have here, almost again, say 50 or 60% of these are made in China.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm guessing things like this
one.
This one is definitely made in China.
Probably these as well.
So these are from Amazon.
Yeah, this one's made in China. Yeah.
Amazon made in China, of course.
Yeah.
This is a brand called Munix, which I think is made in India.
That is a local brand, yes.
And we will cover that at some point.
It's a lovely scissor. It's one that we used on our test drives this week, which we will now clear the board and show you.
And this scissor is
that,
actually made in Japan. It's a Savoy stainless steel made in Japan scissor. I can't be sure how old this is, but I think I own it for over 30 years. I tried looking this up recently, and the brand doesn't have a lot of online presence, but these are scissors that, at least in the 80s and the 90s, were very, very popular in the garment industry. And that's what this design is for.
They almost have become the generic garment industry like symbol. When you think of, some stock image of a tailor's table, you get that.
Yeah, and in fact, we should explain we explained that the shears and the snips, which was the design that we were talking about before. That's the oldest kind of scissor. Let's use that. Next came something like this, where the two handles were even, and in fact
it continues.
Yeah, and that still continues because it's convenient when you're cutting things like paper. The first scissors that Minjal was talking about that were made in the UK on a mass level in the 1700s, they didn't have the technology to mold the metal straight into these shapes.
So you'd have to bend.
So what they did was to actually make sheet metal pieces and then drill these holes.
Oh.
So the first scissors were actually just drilled to make these holes.
They probably cut into your fingers as much as they did into the...
Exactly. And then eventually molding became popular enough that they could just mold this shape as a single piece. So then things like this came up, which of course have this uneven handle shape, and that is of course more used now in the garment industry because you kind of run scissors into fabric like this.
And on a personal note, for some reason as kids, all of us used them this way, and they were terrible, and we thought, I don't know why this works, but it's really just a matter of holding them that way, and then you can guide them along vertically, right? That's how tailoring scissors work. You don't use them this way, you use them this way.
Right. And we will go into, I think, how different people hold scissors in a while. But
the other interesting thing I read about Japanese scissor making is that there was a time when citizens used to actually carry what is called the katana, if that is the correct pronunciation. But there was obviously a time when they were not permitted to carry it anymore. So the sword makers actually then started making scissors because the citizens, they weren't legally allowed to carry weapons with them.
The ceremonial version of swords into plowshares.
I guess so.
Finally, this very colorful scissor, before we move on to our work that we've done. Samir demonstrated this with that nice edge.
If you're into journaling or, these are perfect because you can get these really nice.
Yeah, and I use these and I'll show you these later. This one actually is detachable. It's a very funky thing where you have to pull that apart, and I won't do it now because it took me forever as an old man and not a child with too much enthusiasm. You've got a curved edge and a straight edge, but like a wavy zigzag one. I used to love these as a kid, but I never got one, so I had a lot of fun trying these out finally.
And speaking of trying these out finally, I think we should look at what we've done with these.
Yeah, I'll clear this and one of you show me what you did. Minjal.
So this is my tribute to Henri Matisse.
Ooh.
So we've put up an article on our website which talks about European painters and their preferred stationery tools. Now, while doing the research, we came across, the very, very popular painter Matisse, Henri Matisse, very popular in the 20th century. And in the later part of his career, he was confined to a wheelchair. And the only art that he actually then developed at that point was, the technique of cutouts. What he used to do was, get his studio assistants to paint gouache on paper. He would then sit on the wheelchair and just cut out, shapes and arrange them in these really lively compositions. So if you look at his work, it is mostly, inspired by botanical art, a lot of animals, figures. So this is my, Inky Memo tribute to Matisse. And the scissors I used were Scotch, the Scotch brand. And now the way I hold scissors is like this.
Oh,
I don't
wow.
really put my fingers in the groove. I just I'm just used to holding it like this.
So you're a scary scissor holder.
It's a claw grip.
I am, yeah. So I have a claw grip, and with the scissor, I realized this one is really easy to kind of cut into shapes. You can cut very smoothly without really. I mean, yes, I don't hurt myself because I don't put my hands in the groove. But the Scotch brand is fairly stable as far as art or craft scissor is concerned.
These are made to be craft scissors. I think that's the good thing about them.
Should we see what you all made?
Yeah, Samir, why don't you show us yours?
It was just a pleasure to have something that I could really try out my paper craft with. So, like Minjal, I went all out.
So this is Minjal, you have done pure typographical collage after Matisse, and Samir, you have done almost pop-up, I would say, paper sculpture.
Yeah, it's paper sculpture, but I have just designed it to fold flat, and therefore I guess it is a pop-up, technically. So it can do that.
It has hidden depth.
And have you used almost all the scissors that we demonstrated?
Yes, I think I ended up using a vast majority of them. So I used even the kitchen shears to do a lot of the big cutting.
I found the kitchen shears to be surprisingly good at, even though you'd think that as the craft ones have that nice edge which is supposed to make you feel, and this is kind of old fashioned in some ways because it's big and heavy and it's literally meant for breaking bone. That curve is where you go in and break down chicken bones.
Yeah.
That's it's not meant to be a precision instrument.
But in spite of it having all of those extra bits, the actual straight edge of it it's perfectly sharp and perfectly maneuverable. So yeah, a lot of this stuff was cut with that.
And I should mention that we bought this as a pair thinking that we would never use the second pair. We use these multiple times every day for all sorts of things, from cutting open packages to food prep, and it's really great to have a couple of scissors or have them at hand of this kind of thing. My experiment this week is again pure collage in the classic way of I don't know how many young people watch us, but there used to be these things called magazines.
We love them.
Yeah, and growing up, I would be quite horrified to actually cut up a magazine to use it. We've kept magazines for 20 or 30 years just to read them and continue to read them.
Yeah.
But once in a while, you have magazines that you don't mind sacrificing, and I did not mind sacrificing this issue of Vogue, I think, magazine India for this, which, yes, was entirely created from random pages and textures and photo shoots and things in Vogue. I used mostly the Munix, the little one, for a lot of the
local brand, Indian brand.
Because it's great to go in, especially with all these curves, to have a little nimble thing that you can. Basically, when you're cutting and doing the curve at the same time. At least that's the way I do it. I don't really, do that. It's not like hair cutting. You kind of want this singular, weaving
the
thing.
Smooth movement where you're actually moving the paper and not so much.
Yeah, you're kind of feeding the paper to it. Samir has demonstrated it before, but I think he'll do some more.
I think what essentially people who are not used to using scissors often try to do this, which is to move the scissor along a curve.
And that leads to many sort of
leads to things like
starts.
that. Yeah. Whereas what you can usually do is keep this hand steady and move the paper itself, and that's usually what gives you the best results with scissors. Yeah. This is not the best paper to be cutting, but that gives you an idea.
On glossy paper, it was really fun to do. I also used the kitchen shears for a lot of the bigger ones. I don't know, just sort of went through them really great, especially in the initial stages where I just was picking out the pages and then, cutting out a large section.
So I've always wondered, is there some method to the collage madness, or do you like just plan the composition?
No, I just opened it up, looked at images that I thought were interesting or had nice swathes of color that I would like, or gradients that I would like, or textures that I would like, patterns. And then I just cut them. In some ways, there were maybe 20 or 30 pages cut. And of them, I used about 10 or 12 overall. So it's a matter of curation, first of all, but also just stream of consciousness, putting ideas together as it goes. Sometimes typography can leap out at you and across pages where you see something and then you see something else and, make something nonsensical or funny out of it.
And I think in some ways it's very similar to what you did, in that maybe in your case it was only different in that you created the shapes here. But the general process is the same, where you kind of have the shapes ready and then you move things around to find the best position.
I also thought the composition was the more fun part of it, where you're just putting things together.
True. I don't think any of us had the specific composition in mind when we started the page.
No.
But it is really incredible, right? That you can produce fantastic work with this really humble tool.
And let's not forget, you need glue, which, we will cover in a very soon in an upcoming episode. Because all of these are just glued down pieces of paper.
Yeah, I used a Fevi stick, which is again an Indian brand. The tube applicator.
Your standard, like your Yoo-hoo glue or one of those.
Yeah, one of those. I think the thing that really stands out to me about a scissor, and as a person who does a lot of paper art, I actually don't use scissors that often. Most of the time, I am more fond of the precision of using a craft knife.
And that brings me very helpfully to the one problem I had with this entire thing, and where I had to cheat away from our mandate of using only scissors, which is not a strict mandate. Counterforms. Counterforms are basically, let's say, the inside of an O, the inside of an A, the inside of this hoop, which I wanted to cut out with a scissor, and I tried, but it doesn't actually work that well. You won't get a clean cut unless you gouge in at some point and then try to make some cut.
Exactly.
So for this, I used a good old craft knife. Again, this sits next to the scissor on our table, and we use it every day. So I'd say,
that is definitely a huge shortcoming in scissors. I think the strength of them is the fact that you can do things which are not planned, which in some ways is what we've all gone for, where we just kind of cut into something and then figure it out along the way. As far as the counterforms are concerned, traditional Chinese paper cutting is actually done almost exclusively with scissors, which I found very interesting always.
So what, do they pinch the paper up and then...
Right, so because they're doing kind of symmetrical shapes, they just fold the paper over and cut shapes which become symmetrical.
I think that kind of thing might work better with our cheap test paper, which is a kind of a packing paper.
So what they end up doing, I assume a lot of their patterns and Chinese paper cuts are generally used as kind of decorations on glass windows. So what they end up doing to make a counterform is to just do that. Which of course only works if you want to make a shape that is symmetrical.
And also only works on paper that can then be refolded down into a very flat thing.
But I think what I have also figured out, and this is something I will need to look into at some point, there are probably scissors which are capable of making that initial puncture in a very sharp way, which these people use, and I have never really found one that does that.
A kind of a needle nose scissor.
The problem with most regular scissors is that they have quite a thickness to the blade, and therefore you can't just sort of make a clean puncture into paper. It makes a hole rather than a cut. But I assume there are scissors out there which are much more precise and let you do kind of... So those would solve the problem of the counterform.
And of course, the paper. This glossy magazine paper, not great for folding and then refolding, otherwise you'd get creases everywhere.
The other thing I'd like to mention is this scissor is a Chinese very, very generic scissor, but as Minjal mentioned,
The Munix.
there is a single city in China that is responsible for, I think, something like 60 or 70% of the world's scissor production.
Yes.
And this scissor does come from that city. I think this is the packaging. I think it's Guangdong
That's
is
correct.
the city that is the largest manufacturer of scissors. So yes, even this generic one comes from that one city. The thing that I found interesting about this, because it's not exactly high quality,
Right.
but that actually helped me when I was cutting paper that was thicker. If you see a good quality scissor, any of the others,
Including the Munix, which we bought
which
at
is
the
really
same
quite
time
good quality,
and was
it
recommended.
has a very tight pivot, so it can only move this way and it does not shake at all, even when it's open. This one is a slightly lower quality scissor, and if you see, it has a bit of a loose pivot, which technically is a bad thing. But when you're cutting thick paper, that's actually a really good thing, because it lets you push and pull the blade apart,
you can tension
just
it.
that slight bit, and that helps you make curves much better than if I was cutting with a scissor that was not so loose. So
That's
that
a
was
great,
an interesting
that's a great tip.
that was an interesting find, that what's technically a flaw can actually be useful in
I
this
wonder
case.
if that can be actually designed for in some.
I'm sure it can, and I'm sure there are some scissors for particular uses, especially industrial, which maybe have that give in the blade.
Yeah, there's a lot to think about here. Just purely on an artistic level, I think we all enjoyed making collages. Like you said, we've not done this for a long time. I've certainly not done this for maybe decades, maybe since school.
Yeah, and it was just fun to do something where you assemble things rather than plan them out from the beginning.
Also, I mean, see, for some people, like for me personally, drawing straight lines is a challenge. Cutting straight lines is also a challenge. I think a lot of people face that problem. So this particular piece helped me because most of it were whimsical shapes with no structure or guidelines to follow.
But I think as I said, that's the strength of scissors, and maybe more of us should play around with scissors once in a while, because it kind of frees you from that need to have very precise shapes and
Right. And
designs.
I think we can see across this spread, if you have been thinking of using scissors and or have a pair of scissors that you've not used, use them for things like this. You can use pure colored paper for structure. You can use pure colored paper for shape. And if you have magazines lying around or other books that you want to get rid of with pictures in them, cut them up. Why not?
School books. Cut them up.
There's nothing in school books other than really bad diagrams that you have drawn and then forgotten. Unless there are textbooks. But then do textbooks have pictures anymore? I don't know. Or are they all only pictures? Because it was kind of a dour thing when I was growing up. You looked at those illustrations, and actually maybe that's my villain origin story. Maybe I became an illustrator because I saw so many bad textbook illustrations and thought, you know what? If children have to suffer this, they can suffer me. And you can suffer us every week here on Stationery Test Drive, where we will come back with more test drives of this sort. We are going to do some glue in the future, and it won't be these same ones. We're not that cheap. We're not going to recycle this content. We only do that every 12 weeks when we have a roundup, which we just did, which you should watch if you have not seen other episodes of Stationery Test Drive. It shows off all the kind of works we do every week and more thoughts on the kinds of things we do. We obviously have episodes to go for every tool we do. 27 or actually 25 tool episodes, in fact. This is a milestone for us. We have 2 roundups and 25 tool and stationery test drives. So yeah, congratulations, I guess, to us. And who cares if you don't think that's a milestone, because otherwise we'll just cut you. I've been Vishal.
I'm Samir.
This is Minjal.
Snip, snip.